by all means embrace this as a huge opportunity to enhance our work. At the same time, we must ensure that new people entering humanitarian action as actors have a good knowledge of our humanitarian principles and codes of conduct. And as an example of this, the report points out that the ICRC, our sister organization, has developed standards for using technology in protection work. Fourth challenge, we sometimes see the failure of technology. The report gives the example of during Hurricane Sandy that we've talked about. Internet and cell phone systems were down in certain parts of the disaster-affected area, and some communities and people were cut off. We had similar issues in the triple disaster in Japan, where some people did not know how to access the Internet. What happened in both cases is that old-style media became critical. So, for example, in Hurricane Sandy, 50,000 hard copies of the Sandy Relief Bulletin were printed and distributed, connecting those people who were not digitally connected. And then the final point to make is, can technology replace human interaction? For us, listening to disaster-affected people directly is a critical imperative. And in that sense, again, machines cannot replace people. We have to ask ourselves whether proper accountability can be practiced without face-to-face interaction. So in conclusion, on the side of humanitarian actors, at least in the Red Cross, Red Crescent, we want to and we demonstrate that we fully embrace the opportunities technology brings to improve and scale up our humanitarian action. But we must retain the art of knowing and judging in a principled and ethical manner what works best in the specific circumstances of a given disaster. So the message is, don't throw out all that is proven, but find the right combination between the old and the new.
Wonderful, Matthias. Thank you so much. I have a question from John in the UK. John asks what role private philanthropy can play in either the provision of or utilization of technology to build local capacity. So local capacity for local responders and local communities.
Thank you for the question. I'm tempted to give exactly the same answer as Rebecca gave on a similar question in terms of the private sector. I think it's a question of what best fits in certain circumstances. So the alignment needs to be there between what a philanthropist has to offer and what the needs are. And the support can, in this respect, then range from investment of resources into building systems, into training up people, to providing expertise. Some philanthropists like Bill Gates has a foundation with experts in it that make their expertise available. So it really is not a one solution fits all. It depends on what a philanthropist has to offer.
Thank you very much, Matthias. And maybe one follow-on question. Are you aware of particular training programs? You mentioned the importance of understanding humanitarian principles, ethics, especially for volunteer communities. Are there training programs that provide this sort of introduction to those communities before they participate actively in a disaster response?
We are in the early phases. I can only speak for the Red Cross, Red Crescent here, and other colleagues around the table may know more from other agencies and actors. We are in the early phases of developing online training programs. We have a learning platform that by now, over the first 2 years, has connected 50,000 people that can take basic courses. And two things are happening there. One is it's open to everyone. So the digital volunteers we talked about earlier can access this and get their basic training that way. And then secondly, we are gradually including in the curricula the challenges and opportunities that technology brings.
Matthias, can you talk a little bit about what we at the American Red Cross call GDPC, but of course we turn anything into an acronym. Talk a little bit about the Global Disaster Preparedness Center and what it's in existence to do.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Harold, for the question. We have a number of so-called centers, which are really knowledge and expertise centers. And our understanding is that both the International Federation, but also organizations, member organizations such as the American Red Cross, have a role to play, not just in terms of brokering resources, but brokering expertise and knowledge. And the Global Disaster Preparedness Center that the American Red Cross is kindly hosting and resourcing to a large extent in Washington has played already a phenomenal role in identifying relevant knowledge for disaster preparedness and response and disseminating it throughout the network. I think earlier Laura made a reference to the first aid application that originally came from the United Kingdom, the British Red Cross, then was adopted by the American Red Cross, and now through the Global Reference Center is being made widely available to Red Cross and Red Crescent societies around the world.
Matthias, thank you so much for that presentation. And now finally, we turn to Gary Fowley, head of the Liaison Office of the United Nations International Telecommunication Union. Mr. Fowley joined ITU in 2001 and has been in his current post since 2009. He's an economist and journalist and worked as a producer and reporter for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's news service for 10 years as a freelance reporter for The Economist. Mr. Fowley was account director for the technology arm of the global consulting firm Hill and Knowlton, where his clients included Microsoft and SAP. In 2003 and 2005, Mr. Fowley was responsible for communications for the UN World Summit on the Information Society. In 2005, Mr. Fowley became the UN Chief of Media Liaison in New York, a post he held for 3 years. Mr. Fowley, welcome.
Thanks very much, Enzo. It's my pleasure to be here. First of all, I want to say my goal here was to sort of maybe tie up some loose ends, thinking that there was an opportunity to comment on the commonalities that we have and maybe some of the challenges that we face. But this panel has done such a great job of raising the issues. I'm not sure I can do that. But I do want to say one thing. I think this report is really groundbreaking, and why I think it is because it's the first time in my knowledge that we've really managed to bring together and bring the spotlight to the relationship between humanitarian aid, the science and technology community, and the sustainable development community. All three of them tied together, but we've never really had an opportunity to focus on that, and it is such a powerful combination. So I want to congratulate everybody that was involved in developing this report. And I want to talk also about the potential going forth, especially in the area of private-public partnerships. ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, which is the UN specialized agency for information and communication technologies, has been around for almost 150 years because we've been dealing with this issue really since the beginning of the communication age, which was when the telegraph was invented. So from the time of the telegraph to the internet, it really has been a 150-year history of private-public partnerships in the development of ICTs and humanitarian action, although they haven't always been tied together. And that's because of two things that I think our audience needs to know. One is there has always been a need for standards that will allow for interoperability and interconnection between all of our devices. And those devices have proliferated exponentially, and need for standards has kind of grown with them. And number two, and maybe most importantly, and the hardest for a general audience to understand sometimes, is spectrum. And that's the electromagnetic frequency spectrum, those invisible waves that really tie everything together. And it is really a global natural resource. It's something we all own, but none of us own. And as a result, we've had to manage by treaty access to that spectrum. And that's one of the roles that the ITU plays. The ITU didn't become a UN agency until 1946. But since 1946, I think in terms of the ethical responsibilities that we all have, and especially as a UN agency, we have to uphold Article 19 of the UN Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And that article says that you have the right to hold and express opinion across all media and all frontiers. That's a really was a very progressive thought, I think, in the 40s. But it's really because of ICTs that is now only being tested. The internet, for example, is really possibly our first global utility. It crosses boundaries. In the past, you could control access to water, power, and transportation, but as the internet kind of merges, it's not so easy to do that. But it has brought a big challenge that way, but it's brought the opportunity to really empower people with information and communication technologies to be their own best humanitarian. And I was struck by the statistic that 90% of lives saved are by local people. Well, let's make sure that 100% of the people have access to the most powerful technology available. And there's been, I think, a lot of discussion about how we can do that. But I think humanitarian aid workers are really in a great position to advocate for people's right to critical communication infrastructure. You know how essential it is when you get into the field and it's not available. And I think you have the opportunity to ensure that right to Article 19 right is realized by those people. But again, lots of challenges. Yes, we have almost ubiquitous mobile telephone coverage globally. 70% of the world now has access. There are more mobile telephone subscriptions than there are people on the planet, actually. But what we don't have is the fact that the most powerful technology, internet access, isn't there yet. 40% of the world only has access, and 90% of the people in the developing world don't have access to that technology. So I think it's more incumbent than ever to strengthen the public-private partnership to ensure that we can reach that goal. And one of those tools is the potential of broadband, which is a more efficient way to use the spectrum, and it will allow instantaneous communication, ubiquitous communication wherever we might be. So why do we need private-public partnerships? Well, one, not everybody has a lot of money, but mobilizing resources through the private sector is obviously a very key opportunity in creating not only building relationships, but in creating sustainable technology. It also brings together the potential of scalability, which the public sector can't do. Everyone can't build their own scalable device. So that really helps the private-public partnerships enable scalability. Probably, I think the most important thing behind a private-public partnership is it's always been the catalyst for innovation. If there's a need that the private sector sees it can fulfill, or there's an opportunity that the public sector thinks it needs to fill, and then they build upon each other. And I would use here the example of the tweet. I call it the utility of the tweet. It really is an example of expect the unexpected. And we all talked about Haiti, I think, today, and Haiti was a real watershed for many of us. When at the UN, we lost almost or over 200 of our colleagues in that disaster, so it became a very personal thing. But what we discovered, I think, especially with Twitter and tweets, and I have to confess, to that point, I thought maybe that was a great example of our technological brain getting ahead of our social and practical brain, because, really I didn't need to know all that information about you. But on the other hand, as we found out in Haiti, it became an invaluable tool for resource allocation, and as Laura's mentioned, being able to source the locations of people and provide response. So that was a very important moment, and I think that's what we have to continue to look for, all of us, is the opportunity to exploit and identify and exploit those sort of unexpected, maybe potential that comes often, unfortunately, with disasters. And I think that in the case of Haiti, well, it did provide, it's an awful thing, but it did provide an opportunity to look at a new way of going forward, putting in infrastructure that's sustainable and developable and sustainable in the long run. So I think we need to talk also a bit about the issue of access and affordability. That remains a big issue. As Matthias mentioned, the digital divide still exists. In the past, it was access to telephone. We've kind of come over that one. ITU's been looking at this since 1985. Now we have a digital divide that really is divide that separates the online world from the offline world. So we need to make sure that everybody has access to the most appropriate technology. And again, that's probably broadband technology. One last comment about Haiti. I think it highlighted for us the need to better coordinate amongst all of us, the science and tech community, the development community, and the humanitarian aid community, access to that spectrum. What happened, what I saw, the aid agencies got on the ground. Everybody needed to get a chunk of that spectrum so that they could communicate. They were taking spectrum from wherever they could get it, and as a result, what we call harmful interference was created. You couldn't allocate, people couldn't operate quickly. So there is always a need to coordinate that natural resource going forth, and I think that's one of our most, biggest challenges, but biggest opportunities too, because we are looking at ways to make that space more available through spectrum sharing and white spaces, and we'll get there. With that, I think I'd like to kind of conclude. I think we have a lot of potential, especially in terms of those that are coming online. While we only have 40% of the world online, what we are seeing, and we just released a report a couple of weeks ago about digital natives. Youth are, as we all know, the earliest and fastest adapters in the developing world. That is especially true. So, if we can get the appropriate technology into the hands of youth in the world, I think enabling them and empowering them to be the first responders in a humanitarian crisis may be our best hope in the long run.
Gary, I've got a quick question. You mentioned spectrum sharing. What's the best first simple solution? We've got a captive audience around the world. What can we do immediately to start better sharing that spectrum?
Well, I think you need around the world those countries, especially in the developing world, that have done it right, that have looked at the way they do access licenses, issue licenses to the spectrum. If they do it in an open and transparent way, so that the private sector, when it comes in to look at the opportunity to bid on a license for wireless, for example, that it feels comfortable that its investment is not going to be subverted in any way. There's good governance. That money is not going to end up somewhere else. And if in the developing world, governments that do that have seen real growth. I mean, the private sector will come. They will invest. And the public sector, the governments have the right to put provisos on those licenses so that they could insist that their health systems are connected, their frontline health workers are provided with access, or, it's a matter of imagination and a balance, of course, between public need and private willingness to invest and not stifling the innovation that comes in that very delicate balance. And it always is a bit of a delicate balance, but I think it's one that this report shows is possible if we all kind of work together.
Gary, thank you for that presentation. We spent a bit of time covering the utilization of technologies and their contribution to disaster response when we're talking about natural disasters. Are there special considerations for uses of these same technologies in conflict settings? So I'm thinking, now today in Syria, what are some of the things that we need to be considering where there may be parties that are actively trying to utilize technologies or intercept technologies to gain information for possibly nefarious purposes?
Well, I think there is an issue right now. Take one step back from that. Obviously, I didn't talk about this, and others have. We may be looking at the most powerful tool for humanitarian action, but we're also looking at a tool that's highlighted the need for privacy and security protocols. There's a lot of issues there, and of course, I think in conflict, the old adage of the first victim of war is the truth. It's often difficult to get the whole story, but what we do have to remember, again, is that everybody has an Article 19 right, a right to hold and express opinions across all media and all frontiers. And for some, that's a very challenging article to uphold these days. And again, because of the technology ability to cross borders, the transport method of video, voice, and data has merged so much that being able to have 100% control is a challenge. Nobody can own it completely. But I think you do have to be very prepared in those situations. I think of there was a series of, obviously, in the systematic sexual assaults that were happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and used to think if you could get a mobile phone in the hands of women, maybe they would have a chance. I mean, the potential of technology as a device to protect oneself in conflict, whether or not you're a combatant or not. It's the ability to have that, I need help, I'm in trouble.
Thanks very much, Gary. Maybe a follow-on question as well. I can aim this one maybe at Laura. One of the principles for distribution of aid in any emergency is distributing based on need. How do these technologies affect that basic principle? Are we now distributing aid based on who has the loudest digital voice? And is that still reflective of need?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. When you are in a situation where you have aid, you're playing sort of a zero-sum game in many cases, where if you take it from one place to move it somewhere else, you've now taken a resource from someone and you've made a difficult choice to enhance someone else's service and their experience. I think you have to look at the technology and the information you're getting from technology in the scope of the broad situational awareness that you're getting. So you can't look at it alone. And I talked a little bit about not looking at it as a silo. It's a tool in the toolbox, and it's one piece of the information puzzle, but it can't be the only piece. And when you're hearing the conversation from one area, from one local community, saying we have needs, you really have to lay that up against the other information you're hearing from different sources. And fact check it and really look at that in the full picture, not just what you're hearing through the social media source or through the technology.
Thank you.
And I guess we could open that question to any and everybody who might want to respond to it, and also the question of conflict and Syria. So, Matthias.
Just maybe one or two reflections on that. One is that, as we said earlier, the technology cannot replace human interaction. Technology can also not replace sound leadership and decision making. It would be an illusion to think that technology makes decision making easier, and I think Laura has alluded to that. It may make it easier in terms of maybe having a fuller picture of all the facts, but at the end of the day, some of the hard decisions that you need to face, especially where needs are outstripped by available resources and you need to triage in some way, at the end of the day, it comes back to sound leadership and human judgment. And then in terms of your conflict situations, what I'm reminded years ago during the aftermath of the Rwanda genocide, a colleague from the ICRC pointing out that what cannot happen is that humanitarians are made responsible for finding solutions to a conflict. So we can do our best as a community to try and alleviate suffering also in conflict. But the main solution to alleviating suffering in Syria is to find a political solution to the conflict. And again, that's not about technology. So I think I'm trying to reinforce a message that everyone around the table has been giving, which is technology is a means to an end, not an end, including in conflict situations.
I could just add to that. Incredibly important point. Nothing will substitute for good governance. But what technology does do, especially information communication technology, is it's empowering people to show their colleagues, show the world examples of bad governance. And during the start of the Arab Spring, it was we heard a lot of story. Information, it was watershed for ICTs or information communication technologies are the reason for the Arab Spring. Hardly the case, but they did enable us to capture the picture of Mohamed Bouazizi, who was in Tunis, the fruit seller, who had his fill of graft and corruption and just wanted his fruit scale back. and went to the extreme of immolating himself. And people captured that picture, and that spread as it does across the world because of our global utility that enabled us all of us to look at the issue not only of good governance but of the potential of communications technology as a tool for humanitarian aid, for relief, recovery, and development. And that's why, again, I think this report is so valuable, because it really ties together in many ways those three aspects through the use of technology, or has the potential. And I'm going to take 20 seconds here just to ask our audience if you believe that information communication technology has a role in developing a sustainable future and bringing together really the three pillars of sustainability, which are economic growth and social inclusion and human rights and environmental sustainability. Let's make four. Tell your leaders, because at the UN right now, they're in the process of looking at what's going to happen in 2015 beyond the Millennium Development Goals. And we really need to embrace the potential of technology as a development tool, as a tool for recovery and relief as well. So hopefully that will happen.
Thank you. I'm going to send a question first towards Rebecca and then everybody else. I most recently was the CEO for the Bay Area chapter out in San Francisco, and found the folks from technology companies, the volunteers, were amazingly motivated and very smart, very solutions-oriented. And what is it about the tech world that makes for such amazing humanitarians, and how can those of us in this humanitarian space make it more attractive for them to join us as volunteers?
Harold, that's such an interesting question, and one very close to my heart. IBMers, as I mentioned in my remarks, do like to use the skills that they have, that they use every day for humanitarian, for disaster, for volunteering in their communities, for improving the capacity of nonprofits and schools in their communities. I think that there are one or two trends recently that have really allowed technologists to contribute. One is the growth of open source. It allows developers, coders to, whether they're architects or designers or translators or developers, to contribute to applications which are open, which are which form communities, virtual communities. The second is that virtual nature of the web and of the digital world. People across the world can partner together, can form communities or teams to create something and to deploy that application. So I think that the capabilities that those trends represent have freed up a great number of people in the high-tech world to contribute. I also think that, as just speaking not so much of disaster but of community capacity building, as volunteerism, and volunteerism at IBM has been around for our entire history, but the last 10 years especially with our on-demand community has been supported in a whole new way. And so hundreds of thousands of IBMers across the world volunteer. And as they take the resources that IBM provides to volunteers out into their communities, activity kits, which any volunteer can use, they see how their nonprofits and schools can benefit from their skills. And so that when disasters happen and people are touched by the images that occur, that spread across the world, then they band together through our own internal community building and externally to help. So that's what I see, and I'm very proud to be part of a company that encourages that.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Patrick, I have a question for you. There's just such a proliferation of technological solutions in a variety of different sectors, all pertaining to disaster response, humanitarian assistance. How were you able to select, and what was the process that you used to select the cases that are included in this report?
So with that question, I have to apologize to the many fantastic projects that exist out there and that are not featured in the report. It was very much a partial being an academic, I would call it a snowball sampling, asking people about cases and what they have seen, what they've found interesting, and then going to the next case and the next case, and then building a range of applications and really trying to find applications that span the scope of humanitarian action, from preparedness to early warning to mitigation to response. So trying to find cases that illustrate kind of the range of technology, but also the range of context in which those technologies are applied. There is no repository. There is no systematic assessment of technologies in application in this field, and it is actually one of the key messages of the report. We've all outlined many of the challenges that we are confronted with and that technology is raising, and yet we still have to institutionalize learning around these issues. We still have to find the right framework to evaluate those applications of technologies. I'm not talking of evaluating the intervention, the humanitarian action itself, but really evaluating the technology component of that action. The report provides some guidance for that and really tries to explore how would we go around that? How would we judge the contribution of technology within humanitarian action? So those are all critical elements. Beyond that, though, I also wanted to point out that this is all already happening. Technology is being adopted, and the more efficient, the more visible the gains are, the faster a specific technology will be adopted. And so what we see, I mentioned electronic cash transfer earlier, which is today pretty much a standard tool, but it wasn't just a few years ago. But it has shown to be such a big benefit that there is no hesitation about adopting it. So the key aspects are, for those technologies that may be less visible but still contribute, we need to reflect and think how to best maximize the input of those applications.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Gary, this might be a good one for you. Susan in the UK asks, in vulnerable island communities, traditional mobile phone communications have proved unreliable in emergencies because of overload of personal communications, blocking out humanitarian messages, and users' priorities are basically personal communications. What is your experience with this situation where there's overload?
Well, that is always a challenge, and it depends on obviously on the type of disaster too. I mean, in tsunamis, for example, it's less likely. Towers are often on higher ground to start, so you may not have quite as many problems. So I think the key, though, again, to ensuring that we don't have these kind of problems, or more importantly, have ubiquitous, dependable access, is mobile satellite broadband delivery. The world is under a footprint of satellite communication satellites that are enabled to provide this technology. The challenge, of course, in any state, and especially in small island developing states, is to make it affordable and accessible. And I think in the long run, mobile satellite delivery is really the key. Building resilient networks are essential. And in Haiti, the terrible tragedy that was, in other areas obviously as well, it does provide an opportunity to look at the infrastructure and put in more appropriate technologies, more resilient technologies that will survive these kind of challenges. Capacities and better access to the spectrum, of course, is.
Gary, thanks very much. I believe Patrick had I appreciate that response. Patrick, you had a follow-up you wanted to.
Yes, I just wanted to add to this and point again to this importance of the public-private partnership. But not making it just a partnership, really going into responsibilities and duties of the various actors. What we see right now is a very ad hoc response depending on the crisis, engagement, for example, with cell phone providers. But there is no rule, there is no specific obligations or duty that those providers have when a disaster happens. And by that I mean, should they guarantee certain access, a certain bandwidth to humanitarian worker? How do we go around so that maybe communication should be free in the first 48 hours? I don't know, but we need to really think about what should be mandatory, at least a duty of the public sector in these kind of contexts, then make it very systematic and not ad hoc as it is now. And I don't want to only point to cell phone provider. This also applies to satellite imagery companies or anyone who has the capability to do aerial photography, or really any kind of private actors that has the potential to contribute in the first 48 hours should be responsible and have the duty to act on that.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Matthias, it looks like you wanted to jump in on this one as well.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick one. I think in full endorsement of what both the previous speakers have said, I think the question around island communities and coastal communities highlights again the importance of relying on both technology and all the things that have been said, but also investment into people. I was thinking of one of the untold success stories from the Indian Ocean tsunami was Bangladesh, where there has been intensive investment into preparedness. And what happened there was that people got on their bicycles with whistles and cycled along the coastlines, warning people that the tsunami was coming. And that led to literally hundreds, if not thousands of lives being saved. So, powerful combination of where these people needed to be mobilized, and mobile phones played a role in that. But then it was also reliance on traditional means of simply relying on people.
Thank you, Matthias.
So, last question for each of you, and just a little bit off the charts. I'm going to ask you each, why are you doing this? What did motivate you personally to get into this world of work? Start with Matthias.
Gosh, you're always full of surprises, Harold. If I hear your question correctly, it's not just about the world of technology, but being in humanitarian work. I think it's back to basic human instinct. I was going to say this earlier when you asked Rebecca about the question of what makes technological experts, techies, such good humanitarians. I think there's in all of us. We don't have exclusive rights in the Red Cross, Red Crescent or ownership of compassion. And I think a big motivation is when you see humanitarian and indeed developmental needs. One avenue of helping meet those is to join a humanitarian organization, but it's not the exclusive channel. And it's the more I'm in it, the more the fun is to be with others in partnership in this enterprise.
Well said, Rebecca. Same question.
I can't really separate my personal from my professional. It's a continuum. I've been in the field of philanthropy for over 20 years, and disaster has been one of my focus areas within IBM for probably 7 or 8 years. I stand in awe of the people that I meet in this domain, and I am humbled by the work that they do and the commitment that they show. And I'm drawn to this work in part because of the mission and the heart that I see.
Gary, yes, sir.
Well, this is a tough one for me, but the reason I got into this field at the very beginning I'm from a town or a city called Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and we had a satellite station. And I was a Boy Scout, and we went on a field trip, and the satellite station operator said, "And now we'll listen to space." And he turned on up the volume, and we listened to space. And ever since then, I've been interested in how that signal could be manifest. If we can communicate with space, maybe we could do a better job of communicating with each other. And then, of course, the potential of that has been shown so much in the private-public partnership that it is. So I'll blame it on the Boy Scouts. How about that?
Well said. Laura.
Well, when I sort of sat out on my journey in life, I always thought I was going to be a journalist for the rest of my career. And I would show up at the scenes of disasters. And it was emotional and it was touching. And I thought, there has to be a better way here than always showing up with the microphone and the camera. And I sort of stumbled into this line of work. And it was something that very much touched my heart by what I saw as a journalist. And I think that's really what drew me to this. Every time I showed up at the scene of a tornado, I wanted to put down the camera and help people instead of doing my job as a journalist. And perhaps that was the signal that I needed to be doing something else.
Patrick.
It's maybe a little different. Being based in academia, I sometimes have that frustration of not being in the field as much as I would like. But the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, for that reason, has been an incredible experience for me, because it does have that very good balance between trying to understand what's happening and actually being involved and active on the ground. That being said, I don't feel I ever had a choice. I mean, what no one said around the table is that this is an extremely frustrating job. I mean, we never succeed basically, and every time something happens, I say, okay, this is the last time I'll be in the field. I'm stopping, and then I look around, and what else can I do? And there's nothing that seems worth doing. So this is really not a choice.
Wow. So the thing that you couldn't see is the panelists all charged Enzo and I with answering our questions. So we'll start with you, Enzo.
So the same question for me. For me, I used to sit at my high school looking at the New York City skyline and was fascinated by the United Nations and the concept of the United Nations, and the idea that there could be collaboration and cooperation among different cultures, different states, different peoples, and some of the challenges that were involved in this. And it led me to undertake an internship with UNICEF. And during that experience, I was reporting to the security coordinator for the organization, and we were asked to look at some of the threats to UNICEF staff operating in the field. And we quickly realized that it was very difficult to answer that question because data were not being collected in any sort of systematic way. And this was in the mid-90s. And it became almost a lifelong challenge. It led to me wanting to do a PhD and pursuing a PhD to answer that very question, and then moving from that to work on building security incident reporting systems for UN agencies and non-governmental organizations. And it's just been a motivating factor ever since.
Wow. Well, so my staff have heard me tell the story before, so bear with me, team. Years ago, I was with the Los Angeles chapter of the American Red Cross, and I was a fundraiser and would show up in a suit at the different staff meetings. And the disaster action team, which are a very rowdy bunch, said, Harold, if you really want to understand Red Cross, you need to roll with us when we respond to a disaster. And so I said, okay. So sure enough, 2 a.m, I get a call, and I went out with this ragtag bunch. And magic happened. I didn't know what to do, but I sat there with a clipboard kind of taking down names as this South Central Los Angeles apartment fire caused all these people to be evacuated from this apartment building. And I watched the kind of selfless love that the volunteers had as they were taking care of people who were in shock, some wondering where their mommy and daddy, where their pets were, and the kind of warmth that they displayed really inspired me. It touched my heart. Afterwards, we went to the local diner and had coffee and breakfast at like 6 a.m, all smelling smoky and all of that. There was such a camaraderie and such a passion for the mission around the table that I was hooked. And as a matter of fact, I just got a tweet from my old Bay Area disaster action team saying, guys, we need you to show up. We got a fire in Redwood City. And, Pavlov's dog, I immediately thought, I need to get there. But, of course, I won't be able to today. But that's what drives me and inspires me. Patrick is right. Perhaps one day we will work ourselves out of this job. But in the meantime, we'll do it with great passion and love. So.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for that, Harold. I want to take a moment just to thank Harold, in particular, my co-host. It's my first time meeting him, and it was really a pleasure to co-host this webinar with you today. I'd also like to thank each of the presenters, and particularly thank the participants who joined us today. And then finally, and by no means least, I'd like to thank very much Chloe, Andy, and Christina, our production team here. And let me mention that this entire webcast will be available online as a podcast that you can find on iTunes and also on the HPCR, the Program on Humanitarian Policy and Conflict Research website at hpcrresearch.org. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us today, and good wishes to all.